The monsters, the things that lurk within the dark, that linger within our shadow, watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. Horrors that remain hidden from society, lurking within the unknown, having us doubt their existence. But for today's yarn of terror, we are about to be introduced to a horror that isn't hidden in the shadows, but something that is welcomed by society. A story where one man would question his grip of reality when seeing something that should not be welcome into this world. It all began at a local coffee shop. A screenwriter named Iwasaki who was waiting for his friend Oda to discuss an upcoming film for a school. You see, all day, Iwasaki has been hounded by this feeling that there's misfortune in his future, like an inner feeling that something bad is going to happen, knowing that there's a horror waiting for him. A terrible feeling, knowing that there's something lingering over his shoulder, and yet Iwasaki can't understand what it is. Until he decided to look inside a women's magazine, either to ease his mind from this inner suspicion, to cure his boredom, or just out of curiosity. Sorting through the pages of ads, articles, and beautiful models. Immediately, Iwasaki was thrown off when coming across her. Pictures of a woman that looked nothing like a model. Something that should have never been put inside this magazine. For Iwasaki, the woman was hideous, unsettling to look at. Her abnormal features, those monstrous eyes piercing into his mind in that hideous grin, as if she knew he was watching her, admiring her beauty. They say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but for Iwasaki, this was something else. This woman was completely the opposite. Every minute Iwasaki spent trying to understand why this woman would be considered a fashion model was a mystery that was making him feel more uncomfortable, giving Iwasaki the terrible notion that this model was connected to his feelings of misfortune. As a result of the model, her image burnt into Iwasaki's mind. He found himself struggling to keep his thoughts focused. Every time Iwasaki would close his eyes, he would see that hideous face. Those eyes staring right through him. Even when Iwasaki tried sleeping, it was like his memory of that model would slowly change into something that was contorted and far more hideous. Because of Iwasaki having trouble staying focused, it even began affecting his script writing as well, causing him to be a few days behind, which was becoming an issue for Oda in the upcoming filming project for school. According to Oda, a friend at school and the director for this film, his advice for Iwasaki was to find that magazine, buy it, and stare at the model every day. Let his mind get used to her appearance. And even though Iwasaki was against this advice, a day later, and not a single word written on the script, all because of that model haunting his mind, Iwasaki decided to go into town the next day and find that magazine. However, according to the magazine stand in the stores, it was 1.5 years ago since the magazine was discontinued. Even though the model still haunted Iwasaki's mind for a long time, eventually the memory of the model got fainter, just enough for Iwasaki to focus and finish the script in time. So, a horror story about a screenwriter who's haunted by the image of an abnormal goddess, a memory that slowly faded away, and that hideous beauty becoming nothing more but a terrible thought stored in the back of Iwasaki's mind. I assure you, my friends, Iwasaki is far from escaping the interest of this horror, seeing how this beauty has a special eye for this curious screenwriter. Regardless of the script being held back for almost a week, Iwasaki, Oda, and the rest of the film crew were in disbelief that their recent film had just won first place, and immediately they began planning for a second film. But for this upcoming project, Oda wanted to have a female lead, and feeling that the girls at school were not suitable enough for this role, he decided it would be best to place an ad in public. Unfortunately, Oda and the film crew overestimated themselves when only 3 women responded to the ad. One of them looked average, not what they were looking for. The second one looked beautiful, exactly what Oda wanted for a female lead. But when they decided to see the third woman that responded to the ad, Oda was in disbelief, confused if this was a man or a woman. And when Iwasaki saw the picture, immediately he was horrified when seeing a familiar face. It was her, that hideous woman he saw in the magazine, and maybe it was because of that inner feeling of misfortune. Or maybe Iwasaki couldn't ignore the idea that this woman answering the ad wasn't a coincidence. But Oda didn't share Iwasaki's suspicions with this woman. As a director who's trying to take his role seriously, a professional model answering an ad for a school film project was something that just could not be ignored. Sure, this woman may look scary, but it's obvious she's popular because of her individuality. And to have a professional model participate within this film as an actress would definitely raise the standard of the finished product. And regardless of Iwasaki's disapproval, in that the film may need a few changes, Oda strongly felt that it would be smart to have this woman participate within the project as an antagonist. Besides, maybe if Iwasaki were to meet her in person, he would calm down when seeing that she isn't some hideous monster, but a normal person who should not be judged for her looks. And maybe this eccentric model wasn't a hideous monster. Maybe Iwasaki was over-exaggerating, being ill-mannered with his feelings. Or maybe his premonition was starting to become a reality. When it was time for the film crew to meet the 2 models, obviously the one that was selected to be lead actress was perfect. Tamie, great personality, attractive, a lot of enthusiasm. As for the other one, the professional model who went by the name Fuchi, was not only 30 minutes late, but meeting her in person was an overwhelming experience, which had not eased the tension within Iwasaki. This Fuchi was far more intimidating in person, a woman that towered over everybody. Much like the pictures, her facial expressions were unsettling, expressing no emotions, and those eyes. Something about her eyes that were inhuman. During the meeting with Oda, Fuchi didn't say much. No questions nor concerns about her role within the film, which wasn't specified seeing how Oda decided to bring her into the script last minute. And even though Oda tried easing the tension by telling Fuchi that Iwasaki was her #1 fan, not only was Iwasaki furious with Oda's sense of humor, but was extremely uncomfortable with how Fuchi would just sit there, across from him from the table, staring at Iwasaki. Oda still excused and dismissed the awkward vibes that he and the crew had with Fuchi, somewhat admiring her for her dominating personality, the kind of charisma of a professional model. Sure, she may be a bit distant, weird, but Fuchi would be perfect for the film, most likely having a role as a sorceress that controls the fate of the lead actress. When the day came where the film crew and the 2 models were heading deep into the mountains for filming, which was a perfect spot because of its seclusion, there was something about Fuji's presence that made everybody feel uncomfortable within the van. Like there was something about her that was a bit off. And yet, Oda was still oblivious to these concerns. But when someone joked about the idea that they were filming a horror movie because of how they were driving deep into the woods, an awkward situation, a crude sense of humor that broke the tension because of how everybody felt uncomfortable with Fuji's presence, couldn't resist finding the joke humorous. But when Fuji began smiling, sharing a deep crackling laughter that overpowered everyone within the van, silencing them as their attention was now drawn onto Fuji, witnessing her mouth turning into a stretched grin, revealing several layers of sharp and jagged teeth. And with Iwasaki and Oda witnessing the mouth growing bigger as Fuji maintained her cackling, that was when everybody began to get scared. What happened in the van was something that Oda tried to move on from when reaching their destination. Tried to. Basically, Oda was now terrified of this woman. Even if she was a fashion model, the fact that Fuchi was making everybody on the set feel unsettled with her eerie behavior and her gruesome teeth. Oda's decision of having Fuchi participate within the film was a decision that he was now regretting. But it was Iwasaki who was the one that was going through the worst experience with Fuchi, her number one fan. How this abnormal woman would just stare at him during shooting, enjoying Iwasaki's discomfort when sharing her fascination with the shy boy. And when Iwasaki just couldn't take another minute of Fuchi's strange fixation with him, stepping away from the set to wash his face in the river nearby, just to have a few moments to think straight, to clear his mind from Fuchi's creepy obsession with him. But when walking into the woods and hearing the sounds of something following him, Iwasaki began to panic when seeing Fuchi behind him, just by the look on her face, the slight grin. It seemed like this fashion model had a fancy for Iwasaki. Immediately, Iwasaki panicked and began running through the woods. And when managing to escape from this monstrous woman when hiding behind a tree, Iwasaki was convinced that this premonition was coming true. Something terrible was going to happen. When returning back to the set, Iwasaki tried convincing Oda that they should leave immediately, leaving Fuchi behind because of how there was something not right with her. And Oda agreed. Having Fuchi participate within the film was a mistake on his part, but to leave someone behind in the middle of the woods, a couple hours away from the city, was a bit too much. Which is why Oda felt that it would be best to finish the day's shooting, cancel out Fuchi's role without saying anything, and disassociate themselves from her when returning back home. And as the day progressed, with Fuchi remaining on the set as nothing more than an observer, not knowing that her role was secretly cancelled, it was when Oda and the film crew began praising Temie's acting. Fuchi's attention was now set on the lead actress, and envious fury began to grow within Fuchi. When Fuchi confronted Oda about her scenes, that this whole time they'd been shooting the other girl, Oda and the crew tried avoiding having Fuchi being suspicious over the fact that she wasn't going to be in the film anymore, telling her that Temie's role was essential to the film and that there may be a possibility that they won't be able to get around to Fuchi's role today. And when taking a short break, where Oda and Iwasaki were still discussing the idea of leaving Fuchi behind because of how everybody was now getting the idea that Fuchi was starting to realize that she was no longer in the film. And because of this, they just couldn't ignore the fear that something bad was going to happen. Her behavior, her monstrous appearance, and those teeth, these were indicators that this woman was something you do not want to upset, and that this day was bound to turn into an unremitting horror. But when Miyake ran from the woods, panicking and screaming that Fuchi had just killed Temie because of how she was the lead actress, trying to explain how Fuchi began tearing Temie into pieces and eating her. Of course, Iwasaki believed Miyake's claims, but Oda, however, had a hard time believing that Fuchi was some kind of cannibalistic monster, which is why he decided to go into the woods and see what Miyake was talking about. Now, I believe that when humans begin to experience fear, they react to that fear by avoiding it. But in this case, we have people who rather rationalize that fear to be foolish enough to confront it. That monsters only exist in the shadows, not publicly displayed as fashion models. Fuchi was an intimidating woman. Her weird behavior and unsettling presence that had put everyone on edge. But to go so far to say that she was a monster that had just eaten Temie out of jealousy was something that Oda found difficult to believe. Until Oda, Iwasaki, and the others came across the bloodstains. Bits and pieces of body parts scattered everywhere, terrified when seeing whatever was left of Temie. And when Iwasaki began wondering where Fuchi went, that was when the fashion model came from her hiding spot, her mouth and hands covered with blood, licking the bits of flesh from her lips. And now with the film crew falling into her trap, Fuchi was happy to announce the new changes for the film, that it's now she who's the lead actress. And just as the film crew began running away from this monster, Miyake would be grabbed by Fuchi, having her sharp teeth embedded into his neck, enjoying his warming flesh before hunting down the rest. And as Iwasaki found himself tripping over a tree branch, spraining his ankle, watching the others leaving him behind, at last, Fuchi can now enjoy this moment with her #1 fan. Even though Oda and the other member of the film crew made it back alive, the authorities had only found the remains of Temie and Miyake when searching the woods, but no trace of Iwasaki, nor the model known as Fuchi. What was more strange was that there wasn't even a modeling agency in Japan that had ever heard of Fuchi, or any model that matched her description. It was like she had never existed at all.